feet to dancing. The river of God fills our hearts with cheer. The river of God fills our mouths with laughter, and we rejoice for the river is here. The river of God, ere it teems with life, and all who touch it can be revived. And all who linger on this river shore will come back a-thirsting for more of the Lord. The river of God sets our feet to dancing. The river of God fills our hearts with cheer. The river of God fills our mouths with laughter, and we rejoice for the river is here. Up to the mountain we love to go, to find the presence of the Lord. Along the banks of the river we run, with dancing and laughter, giving praise to the sun. The river of God sets our feet to dancing. The river of God fills our hearts with cheer. The river of God fills our mouths with laughter, and we rejoice for the river is here. The river of God sets our feet to dancing. The river of God fills our hearts with cheer. The river of God fills our mouths with laughter, and we rejoice for the river is here. Up to the mountain we love to go, to find the presence of the Lord. Along the banks of the river we run, with dancing and laughter, giving praise to the sun. The river of God sets our feet to dancing. The river of God fills our hearts with cheer. The river of God fills our mouths with laughter, and we rejoice for the river is here. The river of God sets our feet to dancing. The river of God fills our hearts with cheer. The river of God fills our mouths with laughter, and we rejoice for the river is here. And we rejoice for the river is here. And we rejoice for the river is here.
You gotta take
the Lord with you everywhere you go.
You've got to take
The Lord with you everywhere you go.
You've got to take
The Lord with you everywhere you go.
in the street,
In the street, in the home,
on the job,
on the job,
highways,
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 highways, highways.
You gotta love
One another everywhere you go.
You've got to love
One another everywhere you go.
You've got to love
One another everywhere you go.
in the street,
In the street, in the home,
on the job,
on the job,
highways,
highways, highways,
highways,
highways.
You got to pray.
Praise the Lord daily, children, everywhere you go.
Oh, you've got to pray.
Praise the Lord daily, children, everywhere you go.
You've got to pray.
Praise the Lord daily, children, everywhere you go.
In the street,
In the street, in the home,
on the job,
on the job,
highways,
highways, highways,
highways,
highways,
in the street,
in the street,
in the home,
in the home,
on the job,
on the job,
highways,
highways, highways,
highways, you gotta take
the Lord
at home. It's Easter. Oh, let me just real quick. Sorry. Sorry, Anthony. I wanted to say something about Phil, but it's on my phone. Okay, just real quick, welcome again to the Rio Rancho Church of Christ, those that are present and those that are watching at home. Just real quick, one of our members that moved, Phil Harmon, got a phone call last night that he's in the hospital, got put in the hospital yesterday. He's got a kidney stone for starters, was developed some heart issues, and his blood pressure went really, really low. So they took him to the hospital to get stabilized. He's got fluid in both lungs, and now that turned into a UTI. His kidneys aren't doing real great right now to help him. He's been in the hospital for a couple of days. So let's keep him in mind with prayers. For those of you that don't know who Phil is, he's just the sweetest guy. You know, always has a good word about anybody to say, and you can go up to him and say, hey, how you doing? Or talk to him, and he'll stand there and talk to you. He's always got time for you. So, okay, everybody knows what today is, right? It's Easter Sunday. It's when it's commonly, how can I say this? We celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, is what it amounts to for us. Most people look at it in a different way. Sales at different stores, a day off of work if you work the weekends, things like that. But we know that's not really the issue. And what I'm going to delve in this morning is we have the resurrection that's commonly thought of today, Easter Sunday, but we don't have the resurrection without the crucifixion. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go over the crucifixion of Christ, but it's going to be from a medical viewpoint. Let you know what happens to the body, the trauma that the body goes through. Some of the different Gospels will say, just have a brief 1 or 2 lines that said, well, Jesus was beaten and crucified. And that's pretty much it. Pretty much, for me, it's too overly simplified. That's like saying, like inviting somebody over for dinner and say, okay, well, I'm going to cook whatever, meatloaf, stew, you know, whatever the dish is, and that's it. But for those that prepare meals all the time and cook all the time, there's more to it than that. You can't just sit there and say, okay, I'm going to make, you know, stew today. I'm going to make meatloaf. Well, there's a lot that goes into that. But if we don't know that, it's when you simplify it and say, yeah, well, I'm going to prepare this and prepare that. Oh, okay. And that's it. It's over and done with. But for those that are involved with that, it's a lot more to it. Okay? So where I got this information from was from Dr. Truman Davis. He put it together. He's out at from the University of Tennessee, and he's a Church of Christ pastor. So he put it all pretty much into perspective. And I've had this material for almost 40 years. Our children went to Manteca Christian School, and this was part of the curriculum. It was a handout that was given to each of them around Easter time that explained, that broke it down, the involvement of the crucifixion. But like I said, we can't have the resurrection without going through the crucifixion. Okay, is that pretty much agreed upon? Without the crucifixion, there would be no resurrection. Okay? Crucifixion was thought, given credit of being developed, if you want to call it being credit, by the Persians way back when. But as we know, over time, the Romans had a knack for refining things. So they pretty much perfected or got the crucifixion to a fine point. And that comes probably from crucifying hundreds, if not thousands of people. They could see, they learn each time as they go along, and then they can tweak it a little bit and put different little things in there. Primarily it was a means to have exercise their authority and control. Designed to inflict maximum pain and suffering, which resulted in a very slow death. Very slow and torturous death. Crucifixion was one of the most painful and disgraceful forms of death, primarily reserved for traitors, captive armies, and some of the worst criminals of the time. So, can we pretty much agree on that, or does anybody want to have some input? Any comments? Okay. Denise, can you read one verse for us? John 10:18. John 10:18. I'm not going to have too many verses, probably about 6 or 7.
No one has taken it away from me, but I lay it down on my own initiative. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This commandment I received from my Father.
Okay, I probably should have prefaced that with the verse before, with
Yeah,
verse 17. Can you go ahead and read that one?
Sure. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it again.
Okay. So, what do we have, what can we read into these two verses?
It's a gift to us.
Okay. Okay. Some comments that will be made from time to time is they'll say Jesus' life was taken, which in a sense is true. But I think a more important, better way to put that is that he willingly, he says, you didn't take it from me, I gave it. I gave it up for you, for us. Which you kind of equate that a little bit in different modern terminology of when you're in the military and you get caught up and something's happening. And you know, when you're in the military, especially different aspects of it, we're known to be what's called a band of brothers. Same thing with police officers, same thing with firefighters. They'll do anything for the other. You're not there so much for yourself, but for the guy that's next to you, the guy that you're fighting beside. Like if, you know, you get put in a dreary situation, John over here may throw himself on a hand grenade so he can save the 6 guys that are around him, that are with him. So, yeah, his life was taken, but he willingly gave it up. I mean, I've been in some pretty hairy situations and hadn't quite come to that point, but your thought process is you do think of others before you think of yourself. I mean, you can take that with a grain of salt, whether it's good or not, but it's just one of those phenomenons that happens. You don't think about it consciously, you just do it. But I'm sure Jesus had plenty of time to think about it and ponder it and knew that he had to do this. Okay? Now we're going to go through a couple of gospel accounts. Jim, do you mind reading? Can you read?
Read what verse?
Matthew 27:26. And Vina, do you mind? Mark 15:15. So we'll start with Matthew 27:26. These are just a couple of accounts of the crucifixion. Okay, Jen, if you can do that first, Matthew 27:26.
Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had taken Jesus, flogged and handed him over to be crucified.
Okay, and then Vina, if you can do Mark 15:15.
Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified.
Okay. This is what I was making comments on just a few minutes ago. Very, to me, too oversimplified. Yeah, Jesus, he was over here. Pilate decided he was going to crucify him. He had him flogged, and then he was crucified. Very, very simple. But it leaves a lot of everything out, what he went through for us. Okay. Now, what I'm going to go into a little bit, and then Luke and John don't even mention that he was flogged and scourged. Scourged is probably the more appropriate word. And it's a pretty bad process. And when someone is scourged, I guess I'm saying it right, it has a couple of things going for it. Well, the purpose is a twofold. It weakens the body and it causes tremendous pain. Okay? So, generally when a person is scourged, they're usually stripped, at least of their upper body, and generally secured to some kind of a post or a tree or something similar like that. And generally, it's with the arms up that are a little bit higher than the person's head. Okay? As time goes on during the process, that results in the only way a person's able to support himself was by just being suspended there through the lack of strength to be able to stand up. The whip really isn't so much of a whip, but it's, from what I was able to gather, it's a short whip, for lack of a better terminology, usually probably about maybe 3 or 4 feet long. Has several straps to it. It's not just one piece of material. It's usually got several what we call straps. Now, at the end of the straps, there's usually, the common thing that was used is animal bone and sometimes pieces of metal. Okay? Now, the reason for that is to inflict as much pain and suffering on that person as he gradually gets beat. I just call it a beating. Vicki, can you read for us real quick Deuteronomy 25:3? Okay, what this mentions, just while she's looking that up, is the quantity of the lashings. Generally, they kept it at 39 so they could be in compliance with Jewish law at the time. You could not go over 40 lashes. So we'll just touch on that with Deuteronomy 25:3.
40 stripes he may give him and not exceed, lest if he should exceed and beat him above these with many stripes, then thy brother should seem vile unto thee.
Okay. So generally they try to keep it at 39 because of the Jewish law. Now, the metal balls, the animal bone, as the person is being beat, what do we think is happening here? I mean, it's pretty obvious. The body getting whipped with a whip is bad enough, but when you got little pieces of metal or shards of bone at the end, each lash is cutting deeper into the person's body, creating more damage, more blood flow, and generally it weakens the body. And as time went on, the cuts, sometimes the cuts would be, you'd have a few cuts this way, and as you continue the beating, the cuts just get deeper and deeper and worse, which is what the intended effect was, to cause damage, but primarily when the blood starts flowing, it really weakens the body from loss of blood. I mean, if you can just close your eyes and picture that, it's not a real pleasant event. A lot of times the victims, or I'll call them a victim, person that was going to be crucified, most of the time they didn't even survive to be crucified. They would die as they're being scourged. So, Matthew 27. Okay. Then as this process was going on, you can imagine people that are there, I don't know if they're there to be witnesses, but they're seeing what's going on. And what happens too is the soldiers are doing what to Jesus at the time? Anybody? Okay.
What verse?
No. Well, Matthew 27 through 31 gives a depiction of it. I'll read it. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the governor's residence and gathered the whole company around him. They stripped him and dressed him in a scarlet robe. They twisted together a crown of thorns, placed it on his head, and put a staff in his right hand. And they knelt down before him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews!" Then they spat on him, took the staff, and kept hitting him on the head. After they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to be crucified. So the soldiers were basically having sport, making fun of Jesus because he was the proclaimed king. And they're basically saying, look, demeaning him, belittling him, and just making a mockery out of the whole thing. So, well, if you're a king, how come we're able to do this to you? Why is this being allowed to happen? But that in itself is on top of everything else. Then after the scourging, when Jesus' body is just ripped in a bloody mess, if you can picture that. I mentioned a couple of times before the movie The Passion of the Christ, for those that have seen it. I don't know, I mean, I've seen it, I don't know, I'm going to presume everybody else has. When you look at that, to me, personally, I gotta imagine the way it was shown on film is probably nothing what it was really like. You know, they tried to show what it was without, I mean, it was pretty gruesome to begin with, but that's probably as far as they wanted to carry it while they were filming the movie. It was pretty bad. If you can just, like I said, close your eyes and imagine that. Then after the scourging, Jesus is forced to carry the what I call the crossbeam of the cross. What's commonly depicted is the cross like that, but more than likely, historians think it was just this part, the part that went into the ground, and then the crossbeam. So it looked more like a T, like a capital T, more so than the cross. Could be right, could be wrong, but He was forced to carry the crossbeam of the cross. Try to carry it across his shoulders, which is bad enough. Generally, it was thought to be roughly about 100 to 150 pounds, which is hard enough in itself. People back then, the stature was a lot smaller. That's just the way it was back then. But you can imagine being beaten within an inch of your life, and then you're forced to carry 100 to 150 pound piece of wood to where you're going to die. I'm not sure how far that was. The research that I did says roughly it was about 600 yards away, which is, in today's perspective, roughly the distance of 6 football fields. So if you can use that as a reference point, which is quite a bit. 600 yards is probably between a quarter mile and half a mile distance. And it's not like you carried it, it's more or less like you dragged it along. And that's done more to continue the punishment, humiliation. His breathing gets labored, his strength is, like I said, his strength is primarily all gone, and yet he's forced to do this. And of course, Jesus fell several times. And more than likely, each time he fell, it caused the wounds to reopen, because realistically, when you get all cut up and stuff, just like when you cut yourself accidentally, there's a point after a short period of time where the wound starts to close a little bit, the bleeding slows down a bit. But say you bump your arm or you bump your leg, wherever it is you have the wound, what has a tendency to happen is that the wounds reopen. And then the bleeding, then it just starts all over again. So that's more than likely what may have happened. And then of course we have someone that helped him carry his cross the rest of the way, which was who? We know who that person was?
Simon.
Generally it was thought to be Simon of Cyrene. And that's found in Luke 23:26. Now, the wood that we're talking about, as far as that makes up the cross, we have the luxury in recent times. You have a power saw, some kind of a table saw, something like that. So when you cut the wood, it's fairly smooth. But if you get these wood beams that are cut from trees, they didn't have the luxury of having this power equipment to cut the wood. So consequently, as they chop it to the shape that they want, I got to think that it's all splintered, things like that. But my point being is, it's not a smooth piece of wood, which would have been bad enough in itself. But you can imagine a person's body against wood that's really rough cut. Even if you're just laying there, it's not real comfortable, So if you can just picture that. Okay, Jesus was laid on it, on the long piece. On his back, of course, arms spread out. Now the common thought is that there was nails that would secure his hands to that beam of the cross. But the more likelihood was they were probably big spikes, similar to like railroad ties, but probably not that big. Oversized nails, so to speak. And the body being how it is, and I'm sure the Romans found out through trial and error, you don't nail the spikes through the hand, because when the body's suspended by that weight, what's going to happen is it's going to tear through the hand. So generally what they realized and found out was they did it usually through the wrist, because you get all these bones and tendons in there. Plus it's more painful. you got these, what they call your brachial artery that transmits the pain from the bottom to the top. So that's more than likely the way they did it, through the wrist. Now the legs and the feet were pretty much crossed over. The spike went through both of them, but the legs weren't perfectly straight because that doesn't do the damage that they wanted. They were bent, your legs were bent at the knees, and there was a reason for that. And again, it's to cause as much pain and suffering as they could. And that's why they did it that way. Now, the rest of this that I'm going to go into is what's called a medical speculation. I mean, we have a pretty good idea this is what the body goes through, but first of all, we're not going to be able to talk to somebody that actually went through it because they're not going to be alive. But it's just a pretty good speculation on what happens to the body. Okay, as Jesus is suspended there on the beam, there's increased pressure on the weight, the wrist area, and that causes the pain to shoot through the medial nerve, and that just goes through the upper part of the body. Now, if you're suspended there with your body weight down, what would be the natural tendency for you to try to do without realizing that you're doing it? It's just the thing that you're going to try to do to alleviate the pain and the pressure that your body's going through. What do you think that would be? Okay, like Janice said, you're buckled down a bit, and your tendency is to try to push your body weight up so that you can get air into your lungs. But in the process of doing that, what else is going to happen? Well, you're gonna gradually get weaker through this whole process. But as you're like this, on a not very smooth cut piece of wood, and you're trying to push your body up, what's going to happen? Okay, you're going to scrape your back against that portion of the beam, and it's going to cause the wounds to open and probably create new wounds. And you're going to continue bleeding like that profusely from your back as you try to push your body up so you can try to get some air into your lungs. So if you can just imagine that, I mean, it's just a vicious way to die. And then as you try to push yourself up and you do catch one or two breaths, then because of the loss of blood, your body's going through some fatigue, you're getting tired, cramps are starting to go through your muscles, through your arms and your leg muscles, and then what happens? You're gonna sag down again, just from your sheer body weight. And just picture each time you're sagging and you're trying to push yourself up, you're cutting your back, so you're creating possibly some new wounds to your back. The wounds that did start to close a little bit, they're opening again, which causes more bleeding. So if you can picture that happening several times, and generally it's thought that this process, from the time you're suspended to the time you actually die, is roughly anywhere from 6 to 8 or 9 hours. So if you can imagine that much time going by, constantly pushing yourself up, trying to breathe, your body's constantly sagging. Okay, let's just take the 6-hour time period. 6 minutes is way more than enough to go through, bad enough to go through that. 6 seconds even. So if you can imagine 6, 7, 8 hours of that, Jesus there trying to breathe, your muscles are cramping, your body's losing blood. Just picture that, and he willingly did that for us, okay? Now, as you're there, as you're there with your arms extended, your pectoral muscles, which is your chest muscles, start to really go beyond the point of cramping. You start to get some paralysis in your muscles. Your intercostal muscles, which are the muscles between your rib cage, those start to weaken and gradually become ineffective. Now, as you're going through all this process, Jesus is getting less and less oxygen, less air, less able to breathe. And that's part of this ongoing process. So as a consequence, from the body not able to be, and the blood not being able to be oxygenated, something has to replace that, which is carbon dioxide, which is bad for your body. Your body needs oxygen, your blood needs oxygen to circulate the blood through your body and all that, and reach all the organs and the muscles and the tissues and all that. But that's slowly being replaced by carbon dioxide, which is a poison to your system. Your breathing becomes more shallow. You can't take those deep breaths. You know, instead of taking 1 or 2 nice deep breaths, you're probably taking 6 or 7, like gasping for air. And of course, this is taking a process of time. I mean, you know, I'm more of a visual person, so when I first read this, and when I first was presented with this medical analysis, if you want to call it that, of the crucifixion, I could close my eyes and just visualize what is going on. You know, it's so much more than the first verses we read. It says, okay, Jesus was beaten, Jesus was whipped, and then they crucified him. Well, there's way, way more to it than that. There's a lot more that's involved. So gradually over time, less and less air is able to get into the lungs, get throughout the body. Besides not being able to inhale very much, you can hardly exhale as well. And like I said, you get that carbon dioxide that's part of the process that just gets built up into your system, which is further causing body damage. So, and then you combine that with the hours of being suspended, trying to push yourself up so you can breathe. More often than not, you're not able to do that, so your body weight just sags, and that's just digging into your back. So that, you know, that process in itself is just ridiculous. There's a sac around your heart. It's called the pericardium. That begins filling up with different fluids, a little bit of blood, and different body fluids. It's coming back up through your system. The heart has to work harder. The heart starts compressing more. The heart's having difficulty trying to pump that blood, which now is a lot thicker than, you know, those of us that are just standing or sitting here. Your blood, you got a regular blood flow. But when all this trauma is going on in the body, one of the reactions is the blood starts to get thicker. Now, when the blood gets thicker, what's the result? It's harder and harder to pump through your body. The heart is working a lot more. The heart's not made for that. Okay? And then, so now more time has gone by. You got this constant motion of all these different things that the body goes through. So now, the common conception is the person is almost dead. Jesus is almost dead. So one of the common things that the soldiers would do is what? Does anybody remember? Well, first was the spear that was thrust upward, and the thought is that it penetrated that pericardium, the sac that's around the heart, and some of that fluid came out. So it was probably, excuse me, primarily a clear fluid, but a little bit of blood was mixed in there as well. So when it came out, it gave that red appearance to it, okay? But the other common practice was when the prisoners were just about, or the person on the cross was just about ready to the point of being dead, they would break his legs to speed up the process, as if it wasn't bad enough as it was. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that if your legs are broke, you're not going to be able to do much of anything. Excuse me. You just, yeah. You're not going to be able to do much of anything other than your body's going to be suspended there. Did that happen in Jesus' case? No? Okay.
My bones would be broken.
Yeah, that was prophesied that he's not going to, you're not going to have to break his legs. No bones in his body will be broken. So anyway, Lina, do you mind helping us read John 19, 31 and 33? Through 33, I mean.
What verses?
John 19, 31 through 33.
Now it was the day of preparation, and the next day was to be a special Sabbath. Because the Jewish leaders did not want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath, they asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. The soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man who had been crucified with Jesus, and then those of the other. But when they came to Jesus and found that he was already dead, they did not break his legs.
Okay. So there was really no need for it. Okay. So now we have the other two. I'm going to just use a little cup. So there was no need for that because the perception was that Jesus was already dead. Okay, so to make sure, like what Janice said a couple minutes ago, the ending point basically to pretty much make sure that he was dead, then they thrust that spear into his side. But more than likely it was like between the ribs and the upper rib area, and it penetrated that sac that everybody has that surrounds your heart. It's called the pericardium. And that's where the blood came from. And then the rest we all know. Jesus was put in the tomb, and 3 days later, they go to, a couple of the women go to anoint his body, and the body's not there. It's gone. 3 days later. And that's what's commonly known, or commonly accepted as Easter, which for the resurrection. And like I said in the beginning, in order to have the resurrection, we have to have the crucifixion. Jesus, yeah, his life was taken, but what we touched on a few minutes ago was that he willingly gave it up for us. I mean, and just picture that, like I said, anywhere from 6 to maybe 7 or 8 hour process. It wasn't something that, okay, we put these people up on the cross, and within a matter of a few minutes to maybe half hour to an hour, it was over with. Well, that's, Jimmy, can you help them with the door, please? That wasn't the case. That wasn't the case at all. I mean, I personally can't imagine any worse way to die. Okay? Yeah, you can get shot, you can get stabbed, you can be in a really bad car accident, but a lot of times it's over in a relatively short time. But like I said, the Romans pretty much perfected the art of crucifixion, and it was done mainly to humiliate and torture and cause a person to have a suffering, painful death. And, you know, I can't imagine anyone going through that. Now, my question, and this is just my question, what parent could be there or be in the area and watch their child go through that? Granted, it was going to be an adult child, more than likely. What parent could go through that? I mean, it's bad enough when you're with a relative in the hospital and you know the end is coming and you're there trying to comfort them. But that's the thing, you're trying to comfort them, trying to comfort that person. But what person could willingly stand there, sit there, and watch their adult child go through something like this? I know I couldn't. Now, one of the things that I've mentioned in the past, I've got two sons. It would be not a simple matter, but a comment could be made, hey, well, you have two sons. If you let one be sacrificed, you still have one left. You have two daughters. You can give up one and you'll still have one. Well, you got four. You got four. Imagine that. We can give one up and you still have two or three left. I don't know any parent at all that would be able to do that. I know I couldn't. You know, as a matter of fact, the other extreme goes into effect when you see your kids go through something, especially after they're like teenagers, young adults. And I've told each of mine more than once, you know, when they were going through some issues, I'd say, hey, you know what, if I could go through that for you, I would. Just so I wouldn't have to see it.
You know, it's almost unfathomable that Jesus knew all this was going to happen
Oh, yeah.
from the very beginning.
Oh, yeah.
He had to live with this his whole life until
Yep.
the end. He sweat drops of blood.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the
Well,
mental anguish was probably
Yeah.
almost as bad as physical.
he was so fearful, like you said, he had that fear. He bled blood. Now that's got to be pretty extreme, you know. I've been involved in some incidents and I survived, and afterwards people would say, not each time, but people would say, hey, were you afraid? Weren't you scared of this or that? And I go, you know what, I didn't have time to think about it at the time. But when I think about it now, moments after, or an hour later, or the next day, it's like I'll sit there or lay there in bed and I'll just break out into a sweat. You know, not knowing why, really. But then you go, man, I can't believe I did that. Or I can't believe that was thrust on me, and I survived. And it just, to me anyway, it just makes you think, you know. And that's happened to me more than once. But, and then the other question that goes with that, well, why do you think you didn't die? I go, I don't know. If God doesn't want me yet. Maybe he's got something more for me to do. I don't know. It's not for me to question why, but I'm here. Let's see what we can do. But like I said, I'm sure each of us has gone through something that you see your child go through. And child, when I say child, they could be 40 years old, 50 years old. They're still your child. I would rather go through what they're going through than watch them suffer through it. Now, there's some parents that don't do that, but I'd say a majority of us would do that and do it willingly. I know I would. Now, and that brings up the point that I'm going to hit on that Vanna brought up. You're there knowing you're going to be crucified, knowing everything that goes with it, the process that I just went over, what your body's going to suffer, what your body's going to go through. It's bad enough physically, but the mental part goes into it as well. Now, would you figuratively be willing to go through that, even knowing ahead of time, hey, you know what, it's okay. It's going to hurt now for a little while, but in 3 days, I'm going to come back. I'm going to be back. Even knowing that, it's gonna happen 3 days later, how many people would be willing to go through this?
Love,
I'm sorry?
said it's love.
Yeah, but, I mean, just, you know, like I said, it's one thing going through and say, yeah, Jesus was beaten, Jesus this, and then they crucified him. Okay? Super simplified. There's not much to that. Yeah, it still happened, but when you understand and realize everything that his body went through over 6, 7, 8 hours, I mean, I can't imagine the pain, especially the pain. I mean, I've got a pretty high threshold of pain, but a person just cannot do that. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't care who that person is. It's a process that nobody wants to go through. Even knowing 3 days later you're gonna be resurrected. Now that's something good to look forward to, but to get to point B, you gotta start with point A and everything in between. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't know if I could go through anything like that willingly. Okay? But it's just something to keep in mind. I thought being it was the Easter holiday today, and we have, the men that come up and talk, their 2 or 3 minutes about communion and what it means. But hopefully, from what I said today, while that's going on, if you can just kind of close your eyes for a few seconds and visualize what Jesus went through for us and understand it's more than just 2 minutes of words that whoever's up here at the time relating and talking about, yeah, Jesus did this, he suffered for our sake, allowed himself to be sacrificed, etc. But that crucifixion process, to me, is something that, if you can just visualize it for a minute or two and get a better understanding of what Jesus is willing to do for us, willingly wanted to do for us. I mean, it's just, for me, it's just an eye-opener. When I first read, like I said, this is almost 40 years old from when my kids went to school. And like I said, it was part of their curriculum around Easter time. And for me, it makes the communion have more of an impact of what it means, what Jesus went through. Does anybody have any closing comments or questions or anything they want to share with the group? Well, I hope I didn't make it too gross, but I mean, it is what it is. It's a terrible way to die. What your body goes through is just unfathomable, unthinkable. I mean, I've seen some things done to people that don't even come close to being compared to this. I mean, what I have seen is bad enough. But to go for a person to be going through this is just beyond comprehension as far as I'm concerned.
His mother stood there and watched.
Yeah. You think she would have taken his place if she could have? Yeah. I mean, we all hear that terminology. Could have called down a legion of angels to take him down. He didn't even need a legion. Could have just called one angel that it came and took care of all that. But no, he knew it had to be done, and he knew that was the will of his Father. So, okay, is anybody, any comments, any closing questions or anything? No? Okay, well, thank